Welcome to the Mini Transat Mission, an offshore sailing podcast. I'm your host, Peter Gibbonsneff. This is episode number 4. Welcome back to another episode where we talk all things related to the Class Mini 650 and the Mini Transat. It is Sunday evening, June 25th, 2023, and I'm back in Annapolis, Maryland right now. A lot has happened since the last episode on this podcast. So just a few big things. I flew back to the U.S. in late May, and in early June started the Annapolis and Newport race with U.S. Patriot Sailing, and we'll get into all that towards the end of this episode. But a really interesting start of the race, and a lot of bad weather out there in the ocean. So we'll talk about that soon. We also had the Trophy Map and the Mini Fastnet race take place in France. This might have been the slowest Mini Fastnet race in history. More on that soon as well. Other big news, we are now on Apple Podcasts in addition to Spotify and a few other platforms. So thank you for your patience on that. I think starting this podcast in Europe didn't help that process. And speaking of podcasts, you can now find the Spotify link to this podcast on my website, pgnoceanracing.com. Just click on the podcast section at the top of this website, and you can see the link to this podcast I'm doing, and then also all my interviews I've done on other podcasts as well. So they're all listed there, easy to find. And I just added my most recent interview that came out earlier this month from the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast podcast. So make sure to check that out. Now, on to the main topic for this episode, the qualification process for the Mini Transat. So what does that take, and what do you need to know? So it's a loaded topic. There's a lot that goes into this. 3 really important aspects that you need to know. One is the rules. The rules dictate everything for this, and it's really important to understand them and also understand what's written there and what's always not so clearly written there as well. The race calendar dictates how many qualification miles you can get and what races you can do. And then also the race sign-up process as well. So just because we want to race in a ton of races for the qualification process doesn't mean you can actually do it because there's so many minis out there right now. So understanding these concepts, this process will likely actually influence what mini you buy if you are interested in racing within the fleet. So this is definitely not an afterthought learning about the whole qualification process. And that's qualifying for the Mini Transat or qualifying for the SAS, which is a little bit of a shorter race, which we'll talk about. Or if you just want to buy a mini and go race this thing over in France or the Mediterranean, this process will really could dictate what boat you end up buying or chartering. Now, starting off with the rules, let's start with R8C1. Okay, whatever page that is. You can find all the rules on the rule book. There's a ton of rules out there. But starting with rule R8, if you look at that, that's a good way to start kind of seeing what this process looks like. I'm not going to read them word for word for everything, but there are a few things I might quote along the way. So if you hear about me reading some, I kind of have the rules in front of me here. So a big aspect is, in the year competitor wishes to participate, the competitor must have completed at least 1,500 nautical miles in mini events dated after January 1st of the 5 years prior. Okay, so basically you need to do so many miles within 5 years of the Mini Transat. And these miles have to be within the official mini race program schedule on the boat that you want to do the Mini Transat in, and a minimum of 2 races. And then one of them also has to be single-handed, and another race has to have a leg of more than 500 nautical miles nonstop. So it's that's the very basics of it. A lot of things that go into it. So the number of miles, one has to be single-handed. One has to have a leg of more than 500 nautical miles. And a good way to track this, you can see, is if you go to the Class Mini website and then go to the race schedule or the race calendar. And then if you click on the Mini Transat area on there, you can see the pre-registration list. And you'll see they have all the boats that are pre-registered, which we'll get into it soon. But in that, across every name and boat number, you can see who's done so many number of miles, 500 nautical mile leg, single-handed race, all those kind of things. So there's a ton of things that you have to check off that they track throughout each season as well. So there's definitely a lot of details that go into that. And then another big thing is only the events where the competitor has finished will be considered. So just because you sign up for this race and start it doesn't mean you get credit for it. So you have to complete the race. And the bigger thing is you have to complete the race within the time limit. So most of these races have a time limit where they might say after the third boat finishes in your either series or proto, so there's two different time limits, but after the third place boat finishes, there's let's say 48-hour time limit after that. And after that 48 hours, the finish line closes. So if you don't finish within that time limit, those miles don't count towards the qualification process. Now, another rule is in the year of the event. So in the year of the Mini Transat, each competitor has to have finished at least a level C or a level B event in the official mini class racing on their boat. So the date of this race is not taken into account. So you can do it anytime throughout that season, but you have to complete one race. And so that right there, that rule is why I made the Plastimo Lorient mini race earlier in this season in April my number one choice for the season, because I wanted to knock out one race in the year of the Mini Transat to check the final qualification box. So even if you qualify a year or two in advance, you still have to do one race that year. So that rule right there is why I wanted to really do that PLM race. The next important part is the 1,000 nautical mile solo qualification sail. So for this year, this qualification sail, you have to complete it no later than July 17th for this year's Mini Transat, which starts in September. Which, may sound easy, completing it by July 17th, Mini Transat in September. Okay, that time makes sense. But if you're short on if you're qualifying late, let's say in a prototype this year, and you're trying to get all your miles done, that July 17th date approaches very, very quickly, trying to get that knocked out in time. For this qualification sail, you also have to do it in the boat that you plan on racing the Mini Transat in. So you can't just do the qualification sail on another boat and then expect that to count. This mandatory qualifying course is defined by the class Mini, and it's established for each area. So there's one course for the Atlantic and one course for the Mediterranean. Going to put an asterisk on that. So there's two standard courses that you have to do. However, if you live somewhere else with a Mini, if you request an exemption in the sense where you have a different 1,000-mile course that you want to do, if you have the ability to get approved by the Mini class, but you have to submit it well in advance and get the approval by them. So let's say, for instance, you have a boat somewhere else in Europe, which some people do. They can get approval for doing a different course, which is possible. It's just a lot more that goes into that. The entry point to the loop may be determined according to the harbor departure. So when I did my qualification course, I did the Atlantic loop, which basically most boats go from France to Ireland and back. And I did the reverse. I actually went from Ireland to France and back. The whole reason for that being because I didn't have a visa and I couldn't spend more than 3 months in France. So basically I sailed the boat over to Ireland, spent a couple weeks there to prepare for it, and did my qualification sail out of Ireland. So that's a great option that, just because you're close to the loop for the qualification sail doesn't mean you have to start and stop at a certain place. The course must be completed with no stopovers. And this is just so it's basically to test your seamanship and your ability to be out on the water for an extended amount of time. However, you do have the ability to stop if there's severe weather conditions. But that is something that's clearly documented. You don't want to just leave and then the next day say, I'm stopping for bad weather. But that's something, if you're out there 5 or 6 days into your qualification sail and bad weather approaches, you do have the ability to make that call to say, I need to pause, pull into a port for a day or two, let this bad weather pass, and then continue on the qualification sail. And I think that's a really important aspect, because it makes you think through the process, but also doesn't allow you to be reckless out there on your own trying to complete the qualification sail, especially when deadlines are approaching. You're not allowed to have a motor, or you can't use a motor for the qualification sail except for departing and entering the port. So you can't be motor sailing out there when the wind dies. You can't just turn on your motor. It's also strongly recommended that you take the World Sailing Survival course, so like safety at sea, something like that, before doing the qualification sail. And then another big one that can trip up some people is if you want to do the qualification sale, you have to contact the class mini at least 1 week before the plans start with a filled in form stating the date you want to leave, the order you intend to pass the different marks, and provide them this basic information. So you can't just leave and then tell them after the fact, hey, I did the qualification sale. And then once the course is completed, you have to send a lot of information to the class mini to actually get approved, accepting that your qualification is complete. Again, there's a lot in the rulebook on this. I'm not going to go through every single detail, but here's some of the big points of what you have to provide to the class or to the organization. One is you have to provide substantiating evidence that you actually did do this qualification sale. So things like photos of the start, arrival, any stopovers that you do, taking photos of the GPS with the date and position clearly identified on there. Additionally, you have to, if you have a satellite tracker, providing the link of the tracker so they can see that you actually were out there doing this. And again, following up with pictures, and then also your logbook entries as well. Marine charts. You also have to provide marine charts covering the whole course with at least 2 plots a day, specifying the date and hour. So it's really important to have a big chart covering the whole area. And that shows that you're doing the course, but then also that you're not just, sitting on your phone using Navionics and just doing everything. You actually have to use the paper charts while you're out there. Next thing is a logbook of the qualifying course, and the logbook has to include a lot of things. For instance, when you start and stop, you actually have to have the local authority sign in your logbook. So when I left Ireland, Kinsale, I actually had, I believe this was a harbor master or someone down there with an authority figure stamp my book saying that I was leaving at that time on that day. It just happened to be that the harbor master was on the dock where I was leaving anyway, so it made it really easy. Just walk up to them and they were able to sign my logbook. There's also, you have to provide at least 8 times a day observations on the time, position, atmospheric pressure, compass course, your log, weather observations, and your sails or sail changes. So that's really important because it can be really easy to forget when you're out there on day 5, 6, 7. It's really easy to forget doing the logbook entries when you're by yourself out there, especially if everything's going well or if you're having problems too. And then you also have to provide 2 celestial navigation sites. And with this, you have to do it all essentially without your phone, without an app, and prove that you can do the calculations, the math behind it all with all the required documentation. So they'll actually check your map. Or sorry, not your map, your homework basically, to make sure that you're using the appropriate tables and calculations. And they specify on there too in terms of different types of cell nav. There's obviously different types of sites you can do, but you have to provide a couple different ones. And then also the single sideband. So you have to prove that you have a single sideband radio receiver, and you have to receive at least one weather report on this, and you have to record it with an audio device. And then finally, to provide assessments on the, it says technical or human. It's kind of a translation thing there, but basically, how did the boat perform? How did you perform? How did everything hold up? What can you do better? Things that you learned maybe. It has to be in that assessment. So all this has to be written either in French or English, and then you also can't just sit on it. You have to complete this entire file, send it in within 15 days. And if you don't hit that 15-day limit, they'll ask you to do an additional 300 nautical mile course on top of that. So it's definitely, you definitely want to get in right away. I got to say, when I finished this, I did this in September. When did I do it? I think I did it in September of late August, early September of 2021. And it's really easy to underestimate this qualification sale after you do a couple of races out there. And what do I mean by that is because when you're doing these races, there's so much that goes into it in terms of the safety inspections, the timeline, getting the time right, making everything line up, and then actually doing the racing itself, doing it safe, getting back to your port, wherever you keep your boat. There's so much that goes into it logistically and safety-wise. that by the time you get to the qualification sale, you think, oh, this is going to be easy. This is going to be great. I can do it on my own timeline. I can do it whenever I want. There's a lot more freedom in terms of, when you can actually go do the qualification. But I think you realize it's easy to underestimate what it takes to spend 1,000 miles out there in the Atlantic Ocean. And being out there by yourself for 1,000 miles, it's different when you don't have 60, 70 minis also out there racing at the same time. And you're really out there. You feel like you're out there by yourself doing this. Sure, there's other ships around sometimes, but you might not see boats for days, depending on where you're at, especially when you go pretty far offshore. So you definitely have to be ready in the safety aspect, but then also mentally prepared for what that's going to do. And then I think also because you have the flexibility of when you want to leave, it's easy to keep pushing it down. Oh, I'm going to leave a couple days from now or another couple days. And before you know it, you lose a good weather window, or you're backed up with, I need to do this now before the next race. And maybe you're putting yourself in an unsafe situation because you want to just complete this qualification sale before the next race. So there's a lot of things that you got to think about as you're planning the season before you just jump into the qualification sale. Now, moving on to the next big topic. So that's a lot of the rules, the qualification. The other big aspect that's really important to understand and know for the mini fleet is the race calendar. So races, part of the official mini class, class mini, as they say in French, but the mini class is, they're out of France, Spain, or Italy. But a lot of them are mainly in France and Spain. The two main race calendars, depending on the year. So the odd years is the Mini Transat. So this one's in 2023. The last Mini Transat was in 2021. So every other year on the odd years is the Mini Transat. And then the even years is the SAS. And that's normally in July or August. And the SAS is the Les Sables Azores Les Sables race. 2,600 nautical miles long, 2-stage race. So it's 1,300 nautical miles from Les Sables d'Olonne on the west coast of France to Horta, rest, refit, and then 1,300 nautical miles back to Les Sables d'Olonne. And it's great because Les Sables d'Olonne is the same exact place where the start of the Mini Transat is. So it's a great practice run to learn the area, both on land, but also sailing too. Learn what do the stores have in stock for fixing on your boats and things like that, and learning the area. So it's a really great rehearsal for the Mini Transat itself. And a lot of times the same races occur either every year, or some races are only on the odd years, some races are only on the even years. But for the most part, a lot of the races occur every year. And it's easy to see the historical, formatting of the races based on the calendar that's on the Class Mini website. So, for example, last year there were a few races after the SAS also, but on the year of the Mini Transat, there's no races after the Mini Transat because the boats don't return right away. So if you want to do races in September or October, that's possible on the even years. And then a majority of the races are in the Bay of Biscay off France's west coast. So this year, for example, there's 10 races in France on the Bay of Biscay, 3 races in Spain, and 3 races in Italy. And it's important to understand that because the main Class Mini organization office is in Lorient on the west coast of France there. So that's where the main hub is in terms of the organization and a majority of the boats and the skippers and everything like that. There's plenty of great mini racing in Spain. It's definitely not as big as in France, but it's definitely a good alternative. And then just something to be aware of in Italy. Yes, there are races that are sanctioned by the Class Mini over in Italy, but just be aware, they do have some issues in the sense organizationally of, controlling that part of the class. So I believe in this year, so they had 3 races over there, at least 1 or 2 so far, and they haven't had any actual official participation by the race organizers over there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I think it's also something to be aware of when you're planning your races. Let's say, what if the Class Mini decides, hey, we don't want the Italian, if the Italians aren't following the Class Mini rules, they could just as easily not be sanctioned anymore as Class Mini races. So just something to be aware of as if you're especially like a foreigner trying to plan the races. It's probably a good idea not to make the Italian races be your primary focus, just because, what if they aren't sanctioned? Because on the French races, they have members of the class organization actually there inspecting boats throughout the season, checking on things, letting you know, hey, you meet the rule, but you need to make it better. Or, hey, this is good for a level C race, you're fine here, but you need to improve this thing on their boat for a level B race and fix it for the next one. So there's different aspects like that where you don't necessarily have that in Italy, and they just don't. It's not as official over in Italy, but the miles still do count for right now. So it's just something to be aware of. It's if you join the Class Mini organization, you'll get quarterly meeting notes. And that's just some of the stuff I've been reading in the notes that they talk about as their kind of frustration or concerns over the Italian side of things. I don't want to harp too much on that. It is what it is. It's just an organizational challenge. But I say all that to say France is really the main part for the races. So throughout the year, the races usually start in the Mediterranean. So some skippers choose to start maybe in the Med or in Italy, and then take their boats over to France for other races as well. So it's a great place to kick off the season early. The first race in France is usually the Plastimo Lorient Mini, and that's a double-handed 250-mile race. And that's the one that Jane and I raced back in April. So the PLM normally is the start of the French season there. So only within the past 2 years has there been the need to have a waiting list for the French races. So waiting list is a whole new concept that's new for everyone. We're all trying to figure this out, but it's due to the growth in the participation of the fleet. So it's a great problem to have, but certainly a problem. The race organizers, they can only allow so many boats to enter due to the logistics and safety concerns. So the ports only have so much room within their marinas. So a lot of times these ports in France will have one marina in there, and they only have so many docks available for these races. They can't kick out all the boats. But a lot of times they do kick out boats for certain, so they can fit, let's say, 60, 70 minis. The one in La Trente-sur-Mer, where my boat's at, they're able to have 100 minis there docked, 3 or 4 out, tied up together, but they make the room for them. So it's a very different concept than ocean racing in the U.S., where you normally, if you pay the entry fee and you meet the safety requirements, you can race in an ocean race there. And a lot of times you all keep your boats at different marinas, but for within the Class Mini, you can't really do that due to logistical restraints. And then in the Mediterranean, the races usually don't have waiting lists there since there's not as many minis and there's less skippers. And so the races definitely see far fewer numbers over there. But in France, the races will have 60 to 100 minis, while most of the Med races will have closer to about 20 to 30 competitors. Now, so far we've talked about the rules and we talked about the race calendar. So 2 important concepts to wrap your head around. The next important part is the race sign-up process. If you're interested in racing or interested in campaigning for the Mini Transat, this is one of the most important parts to fully understand as early as possible. This process has changed 3 times over the past 3 years due to so many boats racing. The way it looks like is in January, competitors submit a preference form of up to 8 races ranked in order that they want to race in that season. So that's the big picture. Within the rules, they clearly explain that. Let's see. Sorry, I'm looking at the rules right now. I kind of want to see what I want to talk about. So let's talk about the timeline. So the way it looks like is in January. So for 2023, mid-January, there was a deadline to submit preference forms. By January 29th, there was the deadline for sending the preference form to the Class Mini. Okay, so end of January, we sent that. Then in February 3rd, they published the first list according to the order of the preferences, and this was a draft list, but February 3rd. And then by February 10th, the definitive lists were published for the season. From February 10th to February 24th, everyone had to basically pay the entry fees for the races they got into, and each race had its own requirement, whether you had to pay for it if you're on the waiting list or not. And then by February 27th, the final entry lists were published. So end of February, the final entry list of who's paid for who's gotten into the races, who's paid for the races, and then what spots are open, and how is the waiting list looking like. Keep in mind, the first race of the season started March 16th over in the Mediterranean, and the first French race started in April. So not a lot of time between the end of February and the start of the racing. So when you're thinking about the logistics that go into this, especially if you don't live in Europe, it is really challenging. Because of these factors and the waiting list, it takes a lot longer to qualify for the Mini Transat. So in the past, you could generally qualify within 2 seasons, maybe even 1 if you're on a prototype, but now you have to at least add another season to that. So generally speaking, the minimum now is for prototypes, it takes about 2 seasons to qualify and 3 full seasons as a series boat. Now, the Mini Transat registration allocation is a really important concept to understand as well. And the way they do it is by percentages. So for the Mini Transat, 40% of the boats are prototypes, 40% are series, and then the next 20% is the next order of entry. So how does that look? So going to this year's Mini Transat registration, that started back in January? 150 boats registered for 90 spots, give or take a few, but it was about 150 boats. Immediately, all the series boat spots were filled, as well as the remaining open 20%. So for the first time ever, skippers that completed the SAS, that Les Sables, Azores Les Sables race, in the previous season, they were on the waiting list now. So the SAS used to be a guarantee entry for the Mini Transat because of the additional miles, but that is no longer the case, which I know is really frustrating to a lot of the skippers that have put so much time, energy, money into a campaign to be able to do the SAS and then now not be on the waiting list for the Mini Transat. It's really hard for a lot of the skippers. For myself, I had over 4,600 nautical miles of racing within the class, which put me at the 8th spot on the main list. So think about that. I had 4,600 miles. That's way over the 1,500 nautical mile requirement. But there's series boats with 3,500 miles of racing that are on the waiting list right now. There's currently 37 series boats fully qualified on the waiting list, and that is really insane how many boats there are with just that want to do this race and that are fully qualified. So that's all the series side. But on the protos, it's a little different. It's still really challenging to get the qualification miles in time, but they have a little bit more time to be able to make this happen. So the protos, they've filled 25 of their 33 allocated spots, which means there's only 8 remaining. Asterisk, that is as of the 5 June list. So I just was checking it again today before recording this. And the next update should be any day now this week since the trophy map and the mini fastnet have completed. So it'll be really interesting to see how many more protos qualify for the Mini Transat and how the list is shaping up. So it's really a race to the qualification for the Mini Transat. And if the protos don't qualify in time, the spots will go to the waiting list. So it's not all lost for the series boats that are sitting there. But it really depends on the rest of these few protos. Now let's get a little technical here. There's also another term. It's called the DCQ. And this is it's a technical aspect of it that can be challenging for people that are initially qualifying. It took me a while to wrap my head around it as well. And for a lot of people, it might not even apply or matter. But if you look at the registration list, you'll see a category called the DCQ. And it stands for something in French that I can't pronounce, but it essentially reserves additional spots within those original 90. So if you remember me talking about the percentages initially, that 40%, the 40% for proto, 40% for series, 20% for the additional open spots, they do percentages because depending on how many boats apply for a DCQ, they take those away before the percentages are calculated. Now, looking at this further, it's broken down. The DCQ spots are broken down for prototypes and for foreigners. So for prototypes, for level A races, a maximum of 3 places will be kept for the first 3 qualifying boats that are part of the prototype mini rules and that have been measured for the first time in that year of that race. So what does that mean? Essentially, if you build a brand new prototype and you want to race at the year of the Mini Transat, it's possible if you request the DCQ, get approved, the boat gets measured, you do the 1,500 nautical miles of racing and the qualification, all in the year of that race. So why do they have this DCQ thing for these protos? Essentially, it promotes brand new boats and experimentation and pushing the design limit within that year of the Mini Transat. So it is a great option for brand new prototypes being built. And then the other part of the DCQ, there's spots for foreigners. There's a lot of rules that go into this. It's definitely worth looking at if you don't live in Europe and you're not a resident there. But the way definitely it breaks down into is essentially you have to apply before November 1st, before the year of the Mini Transat. There's also a DCQ for the SAS as well. But looking at this for the Mini Transat, I was just looking at it because they update these rules every year depending on if it's a SAS year or a Mini Transat year. But for the Mini Transat, you have to submit the request by November 1st. And they'll let you know by December. And if you get on this list, you have to do the 1,500 nautical miles of racing. But as long as you, if you're approved and you do those miles, then you're into the Mini Transat and you basically jump ahead of the line, or you get those spots that you applied for. But it's definitely a whole approval process. You have to get approved by the class to request this exemption. So for going to this year's 2023 Mini Transat, there's been 3 DCQ requests approved for the prototypes for the new boats. And then there was 4 DCQ requests approved for foreigners. I did not apply for this spot this year because I had my spot secured. And trust me, I was already typing up the DCQ request this year, going into it the season, and double checked with the class, and they assured me, you do not have to worry about doing the DCQ process. So it's not like I took a spot away. The spots, whether I had a spot the way I did it now or through a DCQ, it was the same spot either way, so it didn't really matter. But because I had the 8th most miles of the series boats, I easily had my spot secured. And looking back on this, one of the things I wish I had done in 2021 was request this DCQ. But at the time, I really didn't understand the process because I just bought my boat. I bought my boat end of September. I was sailing in October. I would have had to request this by November 1st, but I really didn't understand the rules or that it was even an option at the time. And by the time I requested it that winter, it was just too late. That November deadline can be really hard to make when starting a new campaign the year before the Mini Transat. So just looking at the rules here, there's a lot of rules that go into this DCQ process. Check out R10, and then there's a ton of different ones. I think one thing that's interesting is there's 6 places reserved for the foreign DCQs. So 6 sounds like a lot, but as the boats continue, or as the fleet continues to grow, I think these 6 DCQ spots will go pretty fast going forward. And then also that 6 spots takes away from the main list overall. So just an important factor when you're looking at it. Now let's focus on some key takeaways. Starting with learning the system. The race calendar, the rules, registration process, this very well may determine what mini you buy or you charter, and it likely will have a really big impact on it. Whether you want to race in the Mini Transat or maybe you just want to do some of the shorter offshore races. And while it may be possible to qualify for the Mini Transat in one season as a resident outside the EU, I don't necessarily recommend it. Remember, this is coming from someone who tried my first season with numerous offshore races under my belt. I recommend taking the time to learn the boat, learn yourself, and the class as well. So one current example where I would recommend someone to try to qualify in 1 year is only after they complete the Mini Transat first, and then maybe buy a different boat that's maybe a more competitive boat, or the next, a newer model or something like that. So, for example, a guy I know, he completed the Mini Transat in 2021. Then he bought the winning boat from that year's Mini Transat, as well as that boat also won the SAS the following year. So it's a competitive, it's a really competitive boat, clearly. and he is currently competing for a DCQ spot. That makes sense. He's ready. The boat's almost ready. It's just getting some time in the boat for those last final races. And he also has been living over in France and been able to train this past winter as well. But other than that, I really don't recommend trying to do the Mini Transat in 1 year. That's not what this class is designed for. It's not what the race is designed for. And then with all those additional factors we've been talking about, commit the time to do it. Or even if you can't commit the time, don't think of it as full-time over those 2 or 3 seasons, but definitely be ready to commit, a couple months at a time over there. And then also things happen. There are waiting lists to deal with now. The order of preference sheets can make or break a season, and races don't always go to plan. You don't want to put yourself in a compromising position safety-wise just to get the qualifying miles in time. It's not worth risking yourself or other people's lives just because you're trying to get it done in one season. And then also spend the time on the 1,000-mile solo qualification sail, both the preparations and the sail itself. It's really easy to lose sight of how big a task it is when thinking about all of the races that you're going to do or that you just did throughout the season. And remember, this is just a 21-foot boat out there in the ocean by yourself with no other solo sailors, that you're competing against out there. You're doing it really by yourself for this qualification sail. So you definitely need to focus on it and take it seriously. I don't recommend jamming it between 2 races. Give yourself a solid weather window. And it can also, the sail itself can take around 10 days. So be ready for that. If you have at least 2 weeks, if not 3 weeks dedicated to it, that's what I really recommend doing. 2 to 3 weeks for your qualification sail so you can leave when you want with the weather window and do the appropriate prep work ahead of time as well as the post work afterwards. You don't want to finish the race and then the next day deliver the boat down to the next, offshore race and where now you're just trying to get all the documents finished in time. And there's just a lot of things that can go wrong in that situation. Shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about some of the recent events within the mini fleet. So earlier in November, we had the Trophy Marie Agnes Perron, or the Trophy Map race, and that started in June 1st. It was a 220-mile solo race named after someone who unfortunately disappeared in the 1991 Mini Transat. The race started in Douarnenez and went down almost to Quiberon Bay, near where I'm based out of there. So Quiberon Bay is just next to Le Trinité-sur-Mer. So the race down to Quiberon Bay and back. And I was a little busy at the time, so I couldn't follow too much, but it looked like a good race for them. Most recently, there was the Mini Fastnet, started on June 11th, and that was a 600 nautical mile double-handed race, also leaving from Douarnenez, that same place. And for that, it went out across the English Channel, Celtic Sea, around Fastnet Rock, and back to Douarnenez. It was a slow race. Oh my gosh, painfully slow. I felt so bad for the skippers in that. I thought last year's Mini Fastnet was slow, which we had such little wind that they actually didn't send us all the way out to the Fastnet Rock and shortened our course while we were out there. They did not do that this year. I think they didn't like how it went the previous year, so they just sent them all. And the winning time, that 1081 prototype, which is a foiling boat and really fast, definitely was not foiling during this race. It took them 7 days and 6 hours to go 600 miles. And the slowest time was 8 days and 13 hours. So 8.5 days just to go 600 miles. Seeing the pictures out there was like glass, a lot of drifting, light winds, strong current, just painful. So definitely thankful I was not out there on that race. And then on Monday, tomorrow, the Calvados Cup starts, which is another race. Starts in Douarnenez and then goes up through the English Channel. And we'll cover more of that in the next episode. But if you're listening to this on Monday or this week, definitely check out the race tracker. You can find that through the Class Mini website. Go to Calvados Cup 1 and check it out there. In other events, in late May, so as I was saying before, in late May, I returned to the U.S. And about a week later, I was already heading back offshore in the Annapolis-Newport race with U.S. Patriot Sailing on the team's J109 that's based here in Annapolis. The Annapolis Newport race, it's a 475 nautical mile long race, takes place every other year. And the last time I was in this race was 2009 as a midshipman navigating a Naval Academy FAR 40. Put that in perspective, that's also when blackberries were cool, and so it's definitely been a minute since I've done that race. Anyways, this was the first offshore race for U.S. Patriot Sailing. Always a steep learning curve jumping into a big race like this. We knew it was going to be challenging for getting this boat ready, but it ended up, unfortunately, just like a lot of offshore races, got down to the wire with the boat prep, and the last few days were pretty tough with some unexpected challenges. On Wednesday afternoon, so the race was starting on Friday morning. On Wednesday afternoon, our diver told us that he noticed along the keel, the trailing edge, the back edge of the keel, there was some damage to it. So I jumped in the water Wednesday evening, took a look at it, and I think there was about a couple inch long gash in the back of the keel with the metal basically pushed outboard. I could grip the damage I could grip with basically my 4 fingers in my hand, that to put it in perspective. So not good. Definitely not something we wanted to leave offshore with. So we were able to get the boat hauled out Thursday afternoon, leave it in the travel lift for Thursday evening so that we could do the repairs like that evening, and then put the boat back in first thing Friday morning to make it out to the starting line. We did all the repairs. So thank you, Peter Quinn, the director of U.S. Patriot Sailing. He was able to do a great repair job and basically ferry in the damaged part, paint over it, make it look, did it look perfect? Did it look, great, like brand new? No. But in terms of, hydrodynamic performance, you wouldn't be able to tell in the water. The only difference was just different color paint, but he did a great job ferrying it in and making it, adding to the keel with the head basically been ripped off. Here's what we think happened was when the boat was down in Charleston, the boat was on a mooring for a couple weeks, and the likely cause of this was the mooring chain that holds the mooring in wrapped around the keel and damaged the keel by basically sawing the chain on the back edge of the keel. So that's where we think the damage was from. It did not look like anything from like a grounding or hitting anything. It was definitely looked like a chain had basically ground into it because of the damage, the shape of the damage. So the other fortunate thing was there was no wind on Friday morning and afternoon. So the race committee decided to delay the start, and we didn't leave the dock until late Friday afternoon, which was awesome, having those extra couple hours to do the final pack up of the boat and get everything all ready. So it came down to the wire. It was not a perfect, prep of the boat, but it was good enough to get us out there on the race course, and we would have been fine out there in the ocean had the weather cooperated. But of course, the weather forecast was not looking good for that start or for that race going offshore. Initially, so we started on Friday evening in about 10 knots of wind. It was comfortable, sailing upwind. We were headed south out towards the exit of the Chesapeake Bay. For those who aren't familiar, you basically have to sail about 100 miles out towards the mouth before you even get into the ocean. So it's 100 miles of shallow water in the big Chesapeake Bay. And it was pretty nice out. That evening was light. We had good conditions overall for the first 24 hours. There was a few periods where we might have drifted a little bit at night in some of the lulls, but it was beautiful sailing conditions for the first day, though. On Saturday afternoon, we had the spinnaker up and we were going downwind. The wind started increasing and started shifting, so we changed from the spinnaker to the code 0 on a tight reach, and that was awesome. And then finally switched from the code 0 to the number 3 jib. As we approached the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, there was definitely some discussion on board about the weather. We kind of knew how this was going to be shaping up to be. The weather forecasts were not improving. I mean, I think that's the big thing going into this is just because the weather forecasts are looking bad a couple days out doesn't mean it can't change. And so, you can at least start the race hopeful. But as we're getting closer, the weather still was not looking good. It was going to be a nor'easter forecasted with strong winds, steady 30 plus knots on the nose for the next day and a half. definitely not ideal for the J109 being out there in the ocean in nor'easter, and then also for the crew ourselves, who, a lot of the crew did not have a significant offshore experience. And this is a great way, this Annapolis Newport race is a great race to do for your first offshore race to gain that kind of experience. Some of the crew members had only done deliveries offshore, so they'd been offshore, they'd seen it, but they haven't done a race before. This was the perfect opportunity for them to do it with U.S. Patriot Sailing, and they're all veterans, and so it was a great experience having people on there. But the crew came together and agreed it was not worth the risk of hurting anyone on board or the boat itself. It just wasn't worth the risk. So we sailed briefly into the ocean for just a few minutes. We wanted to beat the other J109 out of the bay, which we did. So that was a great little personal victory we had on the boat. And then we also had a guy from Australia on board who had never sailed in the Atlantic before. So we wanted to get him out in the Atlantic, even if it was just for a few minutes. After about 10 minutes of getting wet, we retired from the race, turned back in, and headed north. The boats that continued in the race, we could see them go close haul, make a slight left, and go out towards Chesapeake Light. And they were just pounding into the waves, going upwind, and it looked miserable for them. We could see the misery of those boats, just like it just did not look pleasant. So we were happy to turn around and head back into the Chesapeake Bay. But the sail back was definitely the worst part of the entire race. Double reef in the main with a northerly wind and chop on the bow. Definitely not anywhere near as bad as it would have been if we'd gone offshore, but it wasn't pleasant. At that point, we had a couple of crew members get a little seasick, which was fine because they can learn to see what happens when they get seasick, and we had plenty of other crew members that it wasn't an issue with having them go down for a while. The other J109, who had a lot more experience on their boat was probably set up a lot better, farther in advance, but also with a lot more experienced crew members. They turned around maybe after 12 hours of going offshore, and almost all of their crew was sick. So they did not have a good time on the boat, from what I heard. Third party knowledge, but they turned back eventually. And in the end, I think we made the right call here. I've sailed this race before in nor'easter, and it is not a fun experience. It's not a fun experience even when your boat is made for offshore sailing and where it's made for upwind, heavy air sailing, which the J109 is not necessarily a great boat for that. And then also our entire division ended up retiring as well. So even, some of the boats who completed this race multiple times before decided to retire. So I think we made the right call. Are there other options? Sure. We could have pulled into port for a night. We could have even just anchored. But we decided to turn around and head back home. And I think part of that was we knew it was going to be about a day and a half of a nor'easter. And other things can go wrong too when you're staying out there anchoring, trying to just let the weather storm pass through. You're sitting out there for a while. What if your anchor doesn't hold or things like that? I think there's just a lot more factors that could have gone into it. And I think just heading home, making the call saying, hey, we're done. I think it was just the safest thing to do at the time. I think if we were to do this race 2 years from now in the same boat, and I think if we had a similar situation, I think we'd be more ready at that time to either go out there in the stronger sea state or be more prepared for making that call of, hey, we're going to anchor for 24, 36 hours. And then we're going to, before we leave the bay, and then continue on the race. But I think for this year, we made the right call on that. Well, that's it for episode number 4. If you want to support this campaign, remember you can donate through uspatriotsailing.org. Check the button for Terminal Leave and the Mini Transat campaign, or also on GoFundMe as well. On Spotify and now Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, hit the follow and subscribe button. Leave a review. Follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, at PGN Ocean Racing. And then sign up for emails, pgnoceanracing.com. I do have a new SITREP blog post coming out soon. I've been meaning to get that out for the longest time. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. But I want to get another email update out there soon. So definitely take a look for that. Sign up for the updates. And then let me know what you want to hear more about. Always interested to hear your ideas. We got plenty more topics coming up. Right now is basically the kind of the level setting, trying to have some of those conversations with you, with the listeners of some of the conversations I've had with other people that are just getting into the class, trying to get everyone up to speed as fast as we can. And then from there, maybe we'll talk about some more of the complicated topics or some more specific topics as well. All right, well, with that, it's time to get back to the admin side of campaign work. Got to do some emails, pay some bills, all the most fun things. So thank you for listening to the Mini Transat Mission.